Hey, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. I really hope you enjoy this video. All right, so finishing up, we should be completing our look at the counters. Today we're going to start off where we left off last week, which was, I think, the last thing we talked about was the seller occupied. How to counter that your seller's going to remain in possession after the close of escrow. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. And there you should be looking at right now both the purchase agreement and my PDF, the list of counters. Again, I think most people have requested and gotten it. If you haven't gotten it from me yet, send me an email and I'll send it to you as soon as I possibly can, so that you guys have this list of potential counters for your offers. Makes it a lot easier as you're going through and looking what to counter. So last week we finished with the seller occupied vacant units, right? So seller remaining in possession after the close. The occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller. I like that they put anyone other than the seller, because I have conversations on a regular basis with agents who tell me that they have, a brother, a sister, an aunt and uncle, cousin, nephew, niece that live in the property but didn't pay rent. You have to treat those people as tenants. And so that's a nice bit of verbiage that's added on there. Occupied units by tenants or anyone other than the seller, right? So you may not consider them tenants, but the law does. And so we have to approach that the same exact way. Now for tenants with this contract, right, this is the residential purchase agreement. The RPA, because we all know there is a residential income purchase agreement, and that handles tenancy a little bit differently. With this one, with the RPA, which is legal to use up to 4 units. So anything 1 to 4 units, I could legitimately write an offer with this RPA and it should be acceptable. Is it the correct offer to use if you're talking about 2, 3, or 4 units? No, you should always use the residential income. But this one is acceptable, okay? Now, if I'm writing an offer on a property that has tenants, whether that be single family or multiple units, and it has tenants, and I'm using this form, whether those tenants are remaining in possession or those tenants will be vacant prior to close of escrow, I have to include the tenant occupied property addendum with my offer. Okay? It doesn't matter if they're staying or going. If I'm accepting the property with the tenants in possession, I still have to have the TOPA included. If the tenants are moving out at the close of escrow, still have to have the TOPA included. And that TOPA will dictate, it'll say on there, hey, seller tenant to remain in possession or tenant to be vacant at close of escrow. Now, this is such a tricky thing to deal with tenants right now, because, right, County of LA and I don't know, other places in California, it's difficult or impossible to evict a tenant. But if it is a possibility, right? First off, you got to know. I would do my research. If I'm selling a piece of property and there's a tenant in the property, I would definitely find out if it is possible to evict the tenant. Chances are the answer is no. Okay? A single family is different than units, but in a single family, there's a better chance, there's a higher likelihood that I will have the ability to evict a tenant prior to close of escrow, okay, and have that property be vacant. It's a higher likelihood because the tenant protection laws that exist in the state of California, throughout different counties, and in the city of Los Angeles don't generally fall into single family properties, and that includes condos and townhomes, anything that's not units, okay? But there are still some things that we have to do to protect our seller. So let's just say that it is legal to vacate the units, the single family or the units prior to close of escrow, okay? And that was requested by the buyer's agent or by the buyer, that those units be vacant prior to close of escrow. So we're going to counter to protect our seller. And that counter is going to look like this. Seller will begin eviction process once buyer has removed all contingencies. Buyer agrees to extend escrow as necessary to allow seller to complete the eviction. and I put in little red there, if possible to evict based on local and state ordinance as well as existing moratorium, because we don't know, right? County is until March still. Who knows if that's going to continue to get accepted? There's some things that are probably going to be in the way of those evictions, but if the eviction is allowed, if I'm going to protect my seller, if what I'm doing is to make sure that I'm doing the best thing, because I'm the listing agent, my job is to protect my seller. And now, I mean, I have to do fair dealings with the buyer, but I'm protecting the seller. The reason I'm countering that piece where I don't want to begin the eviction until the buyer removes all their contingencies is because there's a reason why the seller is renting this property. It is income for them, right? Whether it's a single family or it's 2 units, whatever the case is, that is income. So, for example, I accept your offer today, and immediately upon acceptance, I deliver a notice to terminate tenancy to the seller, to the tenants. And I give those tenants the 60 days or 30 days that's required, whatever the case may be. And they say, you know what, we were thinking about leaving anyway, and within 2 or 3 weeks of that delivery, instead of the entire amount of time, they move out. In that 2 or 3 weeks, the buyer does their investigations, does some inspections, finds out, you know what, we really don't like the property, and they cancel. And now I have a vacant property that's not giving me any income. We have to go back on the market. And as we know, in the change of the market that we're at, even with inventory amounts being low, time on market has increased significantly, right, from the height of the market. So if we're talking about now going back on the market and being on the market another 30, 60, 40, 30, 45, 60 days, that's going to be 2 more months of not getting income and probably paying a mortgage on a property that we're trying to sell. That is detrimental to my seller, right? Not all sellers can afford to carry that property without the rent coming back in. So what we do to avoid the chance of them being in the position of having no income and having the buyer be able to cancel is we don't even start that eviction process till the buyer is fully committed to the process, right? They're fully committed to the purchase by removing all of their contingencies. Now, we'll extend the escrow as necessary to allow that to happen. Okay. And then there can be some things that happen after the fact. If I'm hiring an eviction company, which all of you guys should, I talk to agents a lot, and they ask me, what do I do for eviction? How do I evict them? What do I have to do? How do I serve them? How do I do this? My advice is always, and I know it costs money, but always hire a professional company, a professional eviction company, attorney, somebody who knows all the eviction laws backwards and forwards. Make sure that that is done properly, because one mistake, if we make one mistake, that 30 or 60, 90 days turns into 120, 180, 200 days. It turns into a much longer process. And if we don't do it right, we could be back at the beginning when we get to that end of that 180-day process. So my advice to all of you, if you're helping or advising a seller on an eviction, go directly to some professional eviction company or attorney and let them handle that process. The benefit of having somebody handle that process is if towards the end of the escrow, right, we're getting towards the point where the buyer has to close because they're going to lose a rate, having one of those outside third-party eviction companies to handle the process, if you close escrow during the process, that eviction company will still continue the eviction process for the new owner. If we do it, grassroots style, where it's you, the agent, helping the seller only, and then you have to close escrow. If you close escrow and the seller doesn't want to stay on as the manager of the eviction after they've sold the property, then that eviction stops and has to start all over again. So, it's a higher likelihood that a third-party eviction company that you've paid is going to remain on and complete it, as opposed to a seller saying, yeah, I don't own the property anymore, but I'll manage it. I'll go to court. I'll do all these things. It's probably not going to happen. So just really think about advising your client to spend the money on an eviction company to help them through that process. Okay, so that's the counter if you're allowed to vacate. Seller will begin the eviction process once buyer has removed all contingencies. Buyer agrees to extend escrow as necessary to allow seller to complete eviction. Very straightforward, plain and simple. Again, we're still in a seller's market. The seller, you as seller, are still the one that should be dictating the terms of this transaction. Is it a little bit more negotiating now just because of, even though lack of inventory is there, because prices have started to come down a little bit, there's fewer buyers. There's a little bit of negotiating, but as we've seen with the interest rates starting to kind of fall a little bit, new mortgage applications are up, and there's more buyers in the market. So we're going to start to see some of that competition again, I think, as we get further and further into the year and we get towards those buying months. So remember, you have to do what you do to control, to protect your seller, right? I think sometimes for us as listing agents, we start to feel a little desperate, and in that desperation, we start to do things like to placate buyers and try to get deals to work by putting that square peg in the round hole. Okay. Now, in most places now in California, the tenant has to stay with the property. Okay. So if you get an offer that says, hey, this is based on the property being vacant, don't immediately accept it. Find out the terms of what you can do. If you can't evict the tenant, then your counter's going to look tenants to remain in possession, any eviction to be the responsibility of buyer. Okay. Now, again, it says in there in notes, regardless of tenants remaining in possession or being evicted, offers with tenants must include the TOPA, the tenant occupied property addendum. If the TOPA is not included, then my counter is going to include CAR form TOPA to be incorporated, form provided to be signed and returned with this signed counter offer. Okay. Questions about the tenants in regards to counters, issues with the tenants remaining, how we should handle it from a agent's perspective? Anybody? No?
So Kyle, so you're saying if we're submitting an offer on a duplex or anything over 2 units, and the units are going to be either tenant occupied or vacant, we still need to use the TOPA with the offer?
Only if you're using the RPA. If
Okay.
you're writing an offer on 2 units with the RPA, yes, you must include the TOPA. If
Okay.
you're using the residential income purchase agreement, which you should be doing, it
Yeah.
doesn't have any reference to the TOPA.
Okay, perfect. All right. Thank you.
Okay, Jesus, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it sounds great, and that's the way it's supposed to be done. However, when buyers are savvy and they know already that it's very hard to evict people. So if you want a chance to actually sell the property, because unless you sell it for way cheaper with tenants in place, it's very likely it will sell a lot faster evicting the people first and then selling it, just so you can have a conversation with your seller as well.
I understand that. Yes, I understand that. But again, that's a conversation prior to if you're able to evict. Remember, in the state of California, guys, you have to understand this. In the state of California, we're not talking about rent controls in the city of LA or in Santa Monica or any of those other rent control cities or rent stabilization cities. We're talking about the entire state of California. If the property is units, 2, 3, 4 units plus, you have to have cause to vacate a tenant. You can't just say, hey, here's a 30, 60, 90-day notice, you got to get out. You have to have cause. The only cause is if they violated their rental or lease agreement in some way, right? They didn't pay, they're doing something, they have people live there they're not supposed to. Or you're going to move into the unit, a manager's going to move into the unit, your family's going to move into the unit, or you're going to remove the property from the rental market, period. Or you're going to do extreme renovations to the property that require permits and all that, and that people can't live in there while you're doing it. Those are the only ways you can do it. And in all those cases, other than they breached their contract, you've got to pay them relocation. And for the entire state of California, that relocation is 1 month's rent. So not a lot, but it is relocation. Okay? So you have to keep in mind that when you have the conversation with your seller, like, hey, it's going to be better if we sell the property without the tenants, the chances are they don't have the right to evict the tenants anyway. The thing is that I understand what you're saying is that, yeah, it's easier to sell if they're vacant, or we have to lower the price if they have tenants in them. Well, you have to price them for what they are. And if you're lucky enough to have them vacated because the tenant said, oh, we were moving out anyway, we don't want to go through the sale, great, that happens a lot. But the idea that I can force them out doesn't really exist in the state of California any longer. Okay? So just keep that in mind before you start giving advice to your sellers. The problem is that I have conversations a lot of times with agents where they're like, yeah, I told my sellers are already vacating the tenants. Okay, they serve notices, they do these things. Well, the tenant said, yeah, we're moving out anyway. You guys have to remember that even if the tenant says, without following the process of serving and all those things, if the tenant says, I'm going to move out, and then they don't, the rights still apply to them. It doesn't be like, oh, you took your rights away because you told us you were moving. It doesn't work that way. So we run into issues 30, 60, 90, 120 days down the road when the tenant says, can't find a place to go. Sorry, not going anywhere. Or when your seller goes to them and said, would you guys be so kind as to move out, and you make this negotiation with them to move out because you're going to sell the property, and they say, yeah, but you don't pay them relocation, you got a problem, right? So we got first in the chat, Kyle, with ADUs, how would it work? We use the residential income RPA when it has a different address. I mean, if it has a different address for the ADU, I would. For most ADUs, I think you can get away with just using the regular RPA because it's not really units, it's a house with an ADU. But if it has a separate address, yeah, go ahead and use the RPA, and you could use the RPA for any house with an ADU if you want. I just would advise we stick with the regular RPA. Derek, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, Kyle, so in the case of a tenant, maybe they verbally agree to vacate the property. I was in a situation like that last year. Would that mean that, or would it change if you had the tenant put something in writing and then at the end they change their mind? Would that be something that you could possibly use as an enforceable contract? Or
well, yeah. If somebody tells you I'm going to move out, right? They're a tenant. They say I'm going to move out. You need to have them give you notice, just like you would give them notice, right? So you tell them, okay, well, you got to put it in writing. Give me a 30-day notice that you're that you're leaving, and then that way, when they don't leave, you could say, hey, you guys gave me written notice. I'm sorry, it sticks, right? It works the same way.
Thank you.
Okay. So yes, absolutely, put those things in writing. When a tenant tells you they're moving out, now, if you say they're voluntarily moving out, I'm assuming they're the ones that came to you and said, hey, we're moving out. But if the conversation is, hey, would you guys be okay with moving out because we're trying to sell the property, and they say yes, you still have to serve them. You still have to do all the stuff. Give them the notices, give them the time. You still have to do that. You can't just say, okay, well, they said yes, they're good with it, and move on. You guys have to still do the steps as if you're evicting them. So, and that's why I wanted to spend time on this, because this is a tricky thing. I see it a lot where we have this problem with tenants, and a lot of agents out there are still like, nah, don't worry, you could evict them. It's not as easy as you think, and we're the ones who get to see the aftermath of, oh, don't worry, you can evict them. Okay, so just keep in mind, these are conversations with tenants, with sellers, with tenants that you have to have with them. You have to prepare these people ahead of time. And look, if the rents are good, remember that just like in rent control, in units where you're reselling them, you can't raise rents if they've already been raised in the year. You can only raise rents so much, and most of the time, even on vacant units, when you take over, you still kind of have to go based on the last market rent in the area before you raise them up. They're not going to go crazy. So just keep in mind, if the rents are good, like if people are paying good market rents, vacating them is probably not going to be that big of a benefit. It's the ones that have been in there for forever and they're paying very low rents. Okay, hands up. Go ahead, Jesus. I don't know who was first. I didn't see it. So let's go Maricela first.
I just want to make a comment that we're asking a lot about renting and evictions and all that stuff. Next week, the board is having a class, and they're going to put it on here in the training room. So a lot of your questions can be answered through that class that they're offering. But also, just so you know, they extended it. You can't evict people right now. You just can't.
Well, that's LA County. That's specific to LA County. We're not talking, not everywhere. That's LA County, is that moratorium is still in effect. And LA City, I don't even know. So just keep in mind, outside of LA County and LA City, there's still people that do business outside of there. So
pretty much, they said all of California is kind of like rent control now. So pretty much
well, but and that's what I said, is that you can only evict people for cause in the state of California.
It's just so difficult now.
Look, I'm not gonna. I don't want to sound like a tenants' rights activist here, but housing is not easy to come by, and I get it. As an investor, as a homeowner, as someone who wants to own units, I get it that you feel like tenants have too much rights, but I still feel like there could be some more balance. I think there could be, a little less protection, but I don't have a problem with tenants having protection. Jesus, go ahead.
Well, Maricela beat me to the punch. Definitely, he's got a class next week. And also, you mentioned about if the rents are good, why you want to move them out. As long as the cap rate is good, you should be okay. And second of all, if you want to get them out, Derek, and they pay the rent, there's no way you can get them out. You cannot evict people as long as they pay the rent. That is in the whole state of California. Just as a
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah, and I thank you guys for repeating what I've already said a couple times. But yes, thank you. I appreciate. Yes, it's true, guys. You got to be careful with tenants. You got to. You have to. All right, let's move on. Okay. So the next section after the tenant occupied units is the seller delivery of documents. I don't think you need to counter any of that stuff. If I'm the seller, I'm not going to counter that unless it's a really short escrow period and I've asked them for a much shorter inspection and investigation period, right? So if I told them they've only got 10 days to do their investigations, I'm not going to hold on to my documents for 7 days. I'll shorten that a period of time, okay? The one thing that maybe you want to approach is N4 here, which is the install smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and water heater bracing. By default, the seller has to get that stuff done in the first 7 days. I know the reason why they want to do that. I know the reason why that they change that is because those are things that if they're not done and the appraisal comes out, they usually turn into repeat visits from the appraisers. Okay? So that's why they want to do it. But if your seller's not willing to do that, if your seller is not willing to or can't do those things in the 7 days, then you got to counter it. Okay? Because it's the default. So if you can't, you're going to put seller will install smoke detectors, water heater bracing, and carbon monoxide detectors within blank days after acceptance, or seller will install smoke detectors, CO detectors, and water heater bracing after buyer has removed all contingencies. Okay? And then you're going to put in there, because we talked about the idea of we're waiting for you to remove their contingencies before we do the work, that causes an issue with the appraisal. Buyer understands that delay of these installations may cause an appraisal reinspection. Buyer agrees to be responsible for any and all reinspection fees charged. Because, again, in the contract, the default in the contract is if there's a delay to those, like a reinspection fee, that's the seller's responsibility to pay. We'll get to that. I think it shows up in the next page or so. So what we're saying is, hey, I know I'm telling you we're not doing this in the 7 days. We're not doing it until we know you're committed because I don't want to spend the money. That's fine if you don't want to. But we got to now address that we're not going to pay for any reinspection fees. Now, if I were you, my suggestion would be, knowing that this has to be done in the first 7 days, when I take the listing, if we know that there is not the correct smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors installed, or the water heater is not braced, maybe that becomes something that we do as a preparation for marketing, so that when we do get an offer accepted, it's not an issue. Okay, that would be something I would think about. Sorry, I'm in the counters or in the comments here. Somebody's asking me about my counters. It is updated. So if you don't have this counter sheet that we're going over, it is updated. So if you don't have it, just again email me and I'll send it to you. Okay. All right. So that's with the water heater bracing and the installation of the smoke detectors. Okay. Items included and excluded, right? So this is a big section now where they have all these things that are to be included. If there is something that they have requested to be included that was not going to be included, right? That you didn't have any intention of including, they're just asking for it. Or they send you an offer where you put into the MLS, let's say, in the private remarks, that the washer and dryer, the stove, the refrigerator, those things are included, and they didn't include those. Both things have to happen, right? I have to counter it if they didn't include things that I want to leave behind. I have to counter it if they included things that I don't want to leave behind. Okay, does that make sense? You have to address it. You can't just leave it alone. So, for example, okay, they don't put in the RPA the things like I said, the refrigerator, the stove, the washer and dryer are going to stay. they didn't put that in, then I want to counter these items are included in the sale of the property. Okay, this part. I want to put that in there. The reason for that is because when I close, if it wasn't in the purchase agreement that those things were staying behind, and then I leave them behind when we close escrow, it's like I left behind debris and junk and and personal items, and the buyer could come and say, hey, look, I don't want that washer and dryer, I don't want that refrigerator, I don't want the washer and dryer, you guys got to pay to get it out of here. That could happen. So you have to make sure it's included. If people start checking stuff off, either things that don't exist in the property already, like they check wine fridge on here and you don't have one, then you got to counter and take it out. If they're checking off boxes of things that aren't going to stay, that you don't want to leave behind, then you've got to counter back. These items are not included in the sale of the property. You have to address it, okay? Now, as far as items that are excluded, if you're removing fixtures, things that would be considered a fixture, you've got to counter it, right? Buyer to be aware, these items is or are excluded from the sale of the property. Now, what I would suggest you guys do is if there are fixtures, and I've talked about this before, tell your seller, please remove these items, right? Whether it's a lighting fixture of some kind, of ceiling fan, special curtains, window treatments, whatever it is that is custom that they don't want to leave at the property for whatever the reason is, then remove them prior to marketing it and replace it with something that they don't mind staying behind. Okay. All right. I got a couple hands. So Maricela first.
Just really quick, Kyle, why is the bathroom mirrors checked? Like that's by default checked. Like why do they have that checked?
Because people were removing bathroom mirrors from bathrooms when they were moving out.
Okay,
that's why. I mean, think about it. If your buyer moves into the house and all of a sudden the mirror that was in the bathroom, whether it was ornate or nothing, is now taken off, they're going to be unhappy. And that's what was happening. People were just removing their mirrors and taking them, probably because they had put special mirrors in and done something, made some change to the bathroom, and they loved those mirrors, so they took them, and it became an issue. So they wanted to default it. Unless you put specifically, hey, I'm taking that mirror, it's excluded from the sale. And what you can do that with any fixture. Now, the bathroom mirrors should have been a fixture anyway. I'm assuming they're attached to the wall, but there was no specific reference to that, and people were taking them. So that's why. Virginia, you had your hand up too.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of the properties are being flipped and they're hiring, staging companies, sometimes you think it's part of the furniture or, decor that's going to stay, and it turns out it's not. My question is, one time I did end up, getting like a wine refrigerator, and the agent gave us, a disclaimer that the seller will not be held accountable to any malfunctions, etc. Is there a disclaimer that we should include in counter if some of these items are left?
No, it's already in the purchase agreement.
Okay.
If you jump ahead to paragraph 9, you see right here where this is paragraph 3P1 that we're talking about. Paragraph 9 is where the explanation of all these things is, and it says in there that there is no implied warranty or guarantee for any of the item that's left behind.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So again, make sure you're countering anything you're taking that should be a fixture and remain. You counter that you're taking it. Anything that you want to leave behind that wasn't addressed in the original offer, you got to counter and include it. Anything that was included that you don't want to leave behind, you've got to counter it. Okay, so you can't just let it go. Okay. Questions about items included or excluded? Any further questions? Okay, good. All right, so let's look at the NHD report. Pretty straightforward. Really, the only thing we're going to counter there is if they didn't include it, right? You're going to put it. If you want the seller's choice, you're going to do seller's choice. If they didn't put that, right? So it's going to be something like seller to provide NHD report prepared by the name of the company that you use or company of seller's choice, one way or the other. So you're going to address that if they put anything other than seller's choice already. Okay. If somebody put in here, yes, go ahead, Virginia.
Really quick, do you think it's ideal to request the environmental? I have been requesting it, but it does get very, how would you say, detailed, and sometimes it's difficult to explain that to the buyers. Is that something you would suggest or not?
I think you should always ask for the environmental. I think you should always ask for it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Because let's say that you don't ask for that and there's some kind of issue that would have been disclosed in that environmental report that isn't disclosed and it turns into an issue later. They're going to say, well, why didn't we get environmental if that was a choice? Right? They're always going to go back. So
Okay.
my suggestion is always go for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Termite report and clearance. This is where the termite should be. Sometimes people are going to put it in other terms or they'll put it somewhere else in the offer. This is where it should go for the report. Okay, this is when they're requesting the report. That's where it should be. So if it is there, right, I would always counter to take it out. Unless it's a VA loan, there is no termite required. And if there is a request for a termite report and you provide it and leave it in the purchase agreement, the lender is 99% of the time going to require a clearance as part of the funding. So my suggestion is you either counter, there's three options here, and you can see in the counters if you're reading them. Seller to provide termite inspection report prepared by company, whatever name of company, and to pay a maximum of blank for any required Section 1 repairs. Buyer to be responsible for the balance of cost for any Section 1 repairs and for any required Section 2 repairs. So the first choice is, yeah, I'll give it to you and I'll pay for any of the clearances, but I'm maxing out how much I'm going to pay for that clearance. That's option 1. Option 2, seller will not provide a termite inspection report or complete any repairs or clearance. I'm telling you, I'm not doing termite. I'm not providing you with a report. If you want to handle the termite, you do your own report. You be responsible for your own repairs. And the third choice is seller will provide a termite inspection report or wood destroying pest inspection report. Buyer to be responsible for any required repairs and clearance. End of story. So you have three choices. If they ask for the termite, this is only if it's requested. If nobody requests the termite, you don't have to counter this. But if the buyer requests the termite, even though I always tell you guys as buyers agents, please don't put that termite in there. Don't request it unless it's a VA and you have to. But if it's requested and you're the listing agent, you have three choices for the countering. We'll do it and cap how much we're going to spend on doing the report and repairs. We won't do any of it. Or we'll give you a report, but you're going to be responsible for the repairs. Now what happens is this. If, because the lender required it, and it needs to be, it becomes a funding condition that there's a clearance, the buyer has some skin in the game for it, right? They're either paying for all of it, or they're paying for some of it. Now I'm not on the hook for all of it, okay? Now, if I say, no, we're not going to do the report, and we're not going to do the repairs, the chances are that the lender is not going to require it, unless the repairs are horrible that are required, and the appraiser calls it out, okay? So that's that for termite. You only need to use that counter for termite, okay? The next one, the government required point of sale, that's 3Q5 and 6 that we're going to attack here. Seller will provide what this is these are the city pre-sale inspection reports, and these are any repairs that need to be done as part of that report. Okay, so this is the reports, this is the actual repairs that need to be done, right? So, or any corrective actions. So for like a certificate of compliance in the city of LA, things like that. So what we want to, what you should be doing with your sellers is make sure your sellers are aware they have to provide the report. There is no waiving of the report. The report has to be provided. So seller will provide city of blank pre-sale inspection report. Seller will not complete any required repairs. Buyer to take responsibility with the city of whatever to complete the required repairs after the close of escrow. That's the right way to handle it if the seller doesn't want to do the repairs. If the seller's okay with doing the report and the repairs, then you don't have to counter anything, other than if they didn't check the boxes properly, right? But if you want the buyer to be the one that's responsible for getting the clearance done, that's fine. You could do that. You just have to provide the report. Now, again, just going back, if you're doing something in like the city of Southgate where we know that report takes forever, then you should have ordered that report prior to even marketing the property, because you're not going to get it in the time specified in these paragraphs, okay? But your counter should always be seller will provide, buyer to be responsible for the repairs. That's it. That would be the only counters I would address that, okay? Let's see. So Maria is putting in there, ask for the tax as well on the NHD. If your clients have a question for the NHD, have them call the company directly. Okay, so besides the environmental, you can request the tax information there. So maybe check off both those boxes, but I would find out what the cost of that is, because you got to ask for costs. Okay. Oh no, I'm sorry, I'm thinking of the home warranty. Just check off seller, environmental, and tax, and get that. Okay. Jesus had also mentioned a minute ago about plants. Yes, people do take plants. So if plants are going to be excluded, please counter that. Okay. Make sure that you're countering that. Okay. So the inspections, seller has to do the report. Just counter back that they're going to be responsible for the clearance. So for escrow and title, really the counters that we're looking at there is buyer and seller to pay escrow fees each their own, escrow holder to be Pacific Escrow or seller's choice, whatever it is you're using. Title, the thing with title is I keep seeing people checking both. No, it's the seller is usually the one responsible for it. So seller shall pay for owner's title insurance policy issued by title company name and the rep name. So, put your rep name in there, because if, escrows don't have the name, they won't necessarily assign it to that specific rep. Okay. So please make sure that you're putting the title company name and the rep's name when you're countering this. Okay. The next one is, we're not going to go into the city and county transfer tax. There's really not a counter in there, unless for some reason the buyer does not want to pay those. Then you could counter that the buyer to be responsible for those. But the norm is no counter is really necessary there. Okay. The home warranty, again, this is only if it's necessary. Seller shall pay costs not to exceed blank for a 1-year home warranty plan to be issued by either the company that you use and choice of name, or seller's choice. Okay. For the basic coverage, if you are including any optional coverage, list it here and make sure the amount is sufficient to cover it. That's it for your counters. Okay. That's home warranty. Liquidated damage. So we're going to jump really far ahead, right? Because there's no counters to be had in this section. This is just, again, explanations of things that we've already covered. So we're going to go down to paragraph 29 very quickly here. Liquidated damages. Okay. So for paragraphs 29 and 31, if they're not initialed by both parties, seller and buyer, then they are not part of the purchase agreement. Okay. They're not part of the purchase agreement. Oh, I got it. You know what? Paragraph 32 needs to be taken out of there. It's not here anymore. Well, expiration of offer. Okay, we'll talk about that. Sorry, I got sidetracked. We've already addressed it. Liquidated damages, right? So we know liquidated damages is if the buyer acts in bad faith, they breach the contract, they're putting their deposit at risk. So the counter for that is only if the buyer has not initialed it, or if for some reason the seller doesn't want to initial it. But more often than not, we do. So we want the buyer to initial it because they haven't. Buyer to initial paragraph 29 of the RPA and return an updated page 14 of the RPA with this signed counteroffer. That's it. That's all we're going to put in the counter. Now, if for some reason the buyer has initialed and the seller doesn't want to initial it, then you're just going to put paragraph 29 of RPA to be stricken from the agreement. Seller will not initial paragraph 29. That's it. You have to acknowledge it. It can't just sit out there with one person acknowledging it, not the other. Okay. That's for dispute resolution. The arbitration of disputes, that's where we choose to go to arbitration as opposed to litigation. Again, both parties have to initial it. So if the buyer didn't initial it and the seller wants you to, buyer to initial paragraph 31 of the RPA and return an updated page 14 of the RPA with this signed counteroffer. Okay, that's it. That's how we're going to address that. The expiration of offer, this is from our old counters. I think we already addressed that way up here. Yes, we did. Buyer authorizes these interest. Buyer agrees to extend expiration to offer date. This one we don't need to. I need to take this out. So disregard this one. Okay. Unless it is something that you didn't counter already, that the expiration of offer, but we already handled it. So I just made a mistake in my editing there. The last one, backup offers. Okay. That's paragraph 33. That's the acceptance. And we're checking off here for including a backup offer addendum. When accepting backup offers, buyer is aware that this offer is being accepted as a backup offer subject to cancellation of current contract. Buyer is aware that they are in backup offer position number whatever. Backup offer addendum to be incorporated in this agreement. Form provided to be signed and returned with this counteroffer. Okay, so that's what we're going to do for backup offers. Let me see. Hold on. Somebody's putting the text here. You just agreed to remove a paragraph because buyer didn't want to sign or seller. Could any paragraph be removed by mutual agreement? I mean, yes. Okay. So yes, if we both said, hey, look, buyer and seller don't want this to apply to the contract, sure, you could do that unless it's something that's mandated. You can't remove something that's mandated by the state of California, or by any local law. So you can't remove the city inspection reports. You can't remove stuff like that. What we're saying by that one is we're just not acknowledging that that's part of the contract, that dispute resolution or the liquidated damages, that we don't want that to be part of it. So there are certain things that, yeah, you could probably get away with saying, yeah, we both don't want this to be part of the contract. That's okay, but that's generally what's kind of happening in the counters anyway. But there are things that can't be removed that are mandated or are laws. So just as long as you're not trying to violate a law, sure, you can do that. So when we're accepting the backup offers, again, you got to include the backup offer addendum. Please state that there's a backup offer addendum checked or attached to your counteroffer, what backup position they are in. Okay, that should be the majority of the counters that you guys are going to run into. Any questions? Any questions about anything that we discussed? I wanted to make sure that we got through this today, and we did. There wasn't a lot left. Questions? Anybody have any questions about anything? Well, we have a couple minutes because we were quick. No, you guys got it all? All right. Go ahead, Evelyn.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
I just got a question that has been bugging me for like over a month. It might be off topic, but I know if you list a duplex, we are required to submit the 9A report paid by the seller. Aside of that, are we required to apply for a business license for every city that would get a listing agreement?
No.
It just
no. Okay. Well, I mean, you said something. You said if it's a duplex, you're going to get 9A. Well, I mean, the 9A report is any property, right? Like that's not just a duplex.
Just for,
but
okay.
that's not a business license. There are certain cities that do require you as an agent to have a business license. There are certain cities that require the company to have a business license, but not every city does that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? All right. Well, great. I hopefully, and like I said, I'll if you haven't gotten the counter, I'm going to take out that paragraph 33 if you guys already, or paragraph 32. If you guys already have paragraph 32 and yours, just disregard it. You can put a little X through it. I'm going to update it. For those of you that don't have it, need a new copy of it, I'm going to take that one out. So if you guys, again, still need a copy of it, please send me an email. And as soon as I get that edited, I will send it out to you. If there's nothing else, if there's no other questions from you guys, thank you for being here. I hope this makes you better listing agents and agents in general. So good luck, be productive, and I'll talk to you guys soon.